Hello, and welcome to the Marginal Mind Matters podcast, presented by me, Siobhan Henry, and produced by Karen Westman. If you're joining us for the first time, Marginal Mind Matters is a not-for-profit company working to help socially excluded groups cope with the inner suffering of prejudice, shame, inferiority, and rejection through self-help and support groups. Social exclusion shapes how we think and feel, and if we are not aware that we are excluded, then we can't face our thoughts or feelings, and we can't do anything about it. Discrimination forces us into social exclusion, and the systems of prejudice tell us every day that that is where we belong and that is where we should stay. The Marginal Mind Matters podcast is about showing the socially excluded all over the world that we can escape social exclusion and achieve the lives we want, but we need to face the inner struggle of social exclusion before we can do that. Our mission at Marginal Mind Matters is to help empower one socially excluded person at a time in the hope that we will eventually lift all of society. Each week we will choose one emotion that relates to the internal struggle of being socially excluded, and we will do 4 things. First, we will define what this emotion is. Second, we will explain what purpose this emotion serves in society. Third, we will explain what happens when we feel this emotion. And lastly, we will explain how to free ourselves from that emotion. This podcast will be discussing the emotion of shame. To start, we will define what shame means. Shame is defined as a painful feeling of humiliation arising from something we did wrong. In the social sciences, shame is referred to as a master emotion because it determines how we feel about ourselves and how we live our lives. Shame is a constant feeling among the socially excluded. In margins, we say that shame is the punishment we give to ourselves for the wrongs of others. We're going to break for some music, and when we come back, we'll be discussing the role that shame serves in society.
I will be okay. Be okay. I will be okay. I will be okay. 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 Life been calling me, I gotta clean my energy. I'm learning that love is the key. I'm where I'm supposed to be. Life been showing me that I can be anything that I believe. Give it time, the world will see. I will be okay, I will be okay, I'll be okay. I will be okay, I will be okay, I'll be okay. I will be okay, I will be okay, I'll be okay. I will be okay, I will be okay, I'll be okay. Manifesting what I want, making sure to pray in the morning. I like my day to have a certain time, so when I look in the mirror, my self-esteem is clear. I don't wanna have to find myself on nobody else, because I know I will be okay, I will be okay, I'll be okay. I will be okay, I will be okay, I'll be okay. I will be okay, I will be okay, I'll be okay. I will be okay, I will be okay, I'll be okay. No more worrying, no stressing. From now on, I'm only praying to God, yeah. Yeah, I'm letting down my guard, yeah. I know the angels be watching over me. I feel peace surrounding me. I will be okay. I believe it. I know it. I believe it. I will be okay. I will be okay. I'll be okay. I will be okay. I will be okay. I'll be okay. Yes, I will. Yes, I will. Okay. No matter what's going on. Hey, no matter what's going on. I'm gonna be okay. I will be okay. I'll be okay.
Welcome back. So before the break we discussed what shame is, and in this part of the podcast we'll be discussing the role that shame plays in society. Shame is one of the cornerstones of social exclusion. If people feel ashamed of their existence, then they will forever remain under the boots of others. Shame is what prevents the socially excluded from empowering themselves. The socially excluded are told that they live in the conditions they do because of their own shortcomings. If they weren't so stupid or lazy, they wouldn't be in that state. Some societies even tell the excluded that their exclusion is an act of fate or God. Sadly, most of the socially excluded actually believe this. The reason we say in Margins that shame is the punishment we give to ourselves for the wrongs of others is because in socially excluded societies, most of the shame does not arise from something they did at all. The socially excluded are pushed into societies where there are high levels of poverty, violence, and insecurity. This is not their choice. So let's start off by discussing the relationship between poverty and shame. Poverty means the absence of basic resources such as access to food, sanitation, education, and health care. The poor therefore live in a deplorable state. Most people do not choose to be dirty, but they lack access to running water and don't have a fresh set of clothes, and yet they are made to feel ashamed for this. Let's look at the relationship between violence and shame. Violence is very much a part of social exclusion. The frustrations of suffering daily means that sometimes the only form of self-expression is violence. There are gangs, there is domestic violence, there is sexual, physical, and psychological abuse. Do the socially excluded choose this? No, they don't. But their circumstances of constant stress of meeting their basic needs, the frustrations of not being able to escape their situation, and the difficult context that they are in force them into this behavior pattern of abuse and violence. And those who are abused, who are the victims of violence, are stuck in a cycle of shame which they cannot escape because they cannot access the necessary resources. The socially excluded are born into shame, and during their lives that shame is just entrenched further and further. Another aspect is the relationship between insecurity and shame. The socially excluded more often than not lack the security of a home or a steady income, and this leads them to do things that worsen their feelings of shame. Examples are begging for money or having to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do in order to get money. Living in conditions where they have to pay in kind for accommodation or food. We're going to take a break again, and when we come back, we'll be discussing the effect of shame. See you on the other side.
This is a song about somebody else. So don't worry yourself, worry yourself. The devil's right there in the details. And you don't wanna hurt yourself, hurt yourself. By looking too closely, by looking too closely. No, 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 no. Put your arms around somebody else and don't punish yourself, punish yourself. Truth is like blood underneath your fingernails, and you don't wanna hurt yourself, hurt yourself. Looking too closely, looking too closely. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. And I could be wrong about anybody else, so don't kid yourself, kid yourself. It's you right there in the mirror. And you don't wanna hurt yourself, hurt yourself. By looking too close. Too close.
So what is the effect of shame in society? Well, shame makes us feel worthless. It pushes us further and further into the shadows when we should claim our place in the sun. We get trapped by our circumstances and our past and present actions, and we lose all sight of the possibility of change. Social exclusion is denying our existence, and shame is us denying our own existence. Let me repeat that. Social exclusion is others denying our existence. And shame is us denying our own existence. It is the worst possible thing we can do to ourselves. We're going to break again for some music, and when we come back, we'll be discussing what we do to overcome the feeling of shame.
There's a rhythm and rush these days, where the lines don't move and the colors don't fade. Leaves you empty with nothing but dreams, in a world gone shallow, in a world gone mean. Sometimes there's things a man cannot know. Gears won't turn and the leaves won't grow. There's no place to run and no gasoline. Engine won't turn and the train won't lead. Engines won't turn and the train won't lead. I will stay with you tonight, hold you close till the morning light. The morning watch the new day rise. We'll do whatever just to stay alive. We'll do whatever just to stay alive. Well, the way I feel is the way I ride, racing like the thoughts of a man who lies. There is a truth and it's on our side. Dawn is coming, open your eyes. Look into the sun as the new days rise. And I will wait for you tonight. You're here forever and you're by my side. I've been waiting all my life to fill your heart as it's keeping time. Do whatever just to stay alive. Dawn is coming, open your eyes. 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 Look into the sun as the new days rise.
Welcome back. In this, the final part of our podcast, we'll be discussing how to free ourselves from the feeling of shame. Shame is an irrational feeling. It is a monster we spend our lives fearing and running from. And in order to overcome it, we must acquaint ourselves with that monster and understand it. And once shame is brought into the light, it loses its power to terrorize us. The way to do this is to take an incident that we are ashamed about and remember it in detail. This is something we avoid because the events that cause shame also cause tremendous pain. Being abused is an example. Most of the socially excluded have experienced some form of abuse. This is because the socially excluded lack protection. They also lack access to the systems of law and order that would prevent abuse from happening. Where there is no punishment for abuse, there is no fear of being abusive. The socially excluded tend to get abused and conceal that abuse. They carry the pain of the act of the abuse, and they also carry the shame for a crime that was done to them. When the abused realize this, they move the shame where it belongs, to the abuser, and they allow themselves to feel the appropriate emotions, the emotions they should be feeling. For example, hurt for being abused and anger towards a society that failed to protect them. We hope you found this podcast useful. We thank you for joining us, and we hope you will join us for our next podcast on discounting. Thanks and goodbye.